It was a dark and stormy night, and I was working the late shift at the pizza place. I was tired and ready to go home, but then I got a call for a delivery to a remote cabin in the woods. I hesitated at first, but the promise of a big tip convinced me to take the job. I drove my beat-up car down a winding dirt road, my headlights barely cutting through the thick fog. The cabin was situated at the end of the road, surrounded by tall trees and dense undergrowth. As I approached the cabin, I noticed that the front porch light was on, but there was no car parked outside. I shrugged it off and rang the doorbell, clutching the hot pizza box tightly. The door creaked open, and I saw a figure standing in the shadows. I couldn't make out their face, but they beckoned me inside, their voice barely audible over the howling wind. As I stepped inside, I realized that something was off. The cabin was cold and musty, with no furniture or decorations to speak of. I saw the figure standing in the corner, their back turned to me, and I began to feel uneasy. Suddenly, the figure turned around, revealing a grotesque, disfigured face. Their eyes glowed in the dark, and I could see that they were holding a knife in their hand. I tried to run, but the figure was too fast, grabbing me by the collar and dragging me deeper into the cabin. They forced me to sit down at a table, where they began to cut slices of pizza with the knife, their movements slow and deliberate. As I watched in horror, the figure took a bite of the pizza, revealing razor-sharp teeth. They turned to me and said, "You're not leaving this cabin alive. You're going to be our next meal." I fought back with all my strength, but the figure was too strong. I felt a sharp pain in my neck, and then everything went black. When I woke up, I was outside the cabin, my car parked nearby. The pizza box was sitting next to me, but it was empty. I didn't remember anything after the figure attacked me, but I knew that I had narrowly escaped with my life. I never delivered another pizza to that cabin, and I quit my job soon after. To this day, I can still hear the figure's sinister laugh echoing in my nightmares. It was a typical Friday night at the pizza place, and I was making my rounds delivering pizzas. I had just finished delivering a large pepperoni pizza to a suburban house when I got a strange order for a pizza with a cryptic note attached. The note read, "Deliver the pizza to the abandoned factory on the outskirts of town. Don't ask questions." I hesitated for a moment, but the promise of a large tip lured me in. I got in my car and drove towards the factory, wondering what kind of person would order a pizza to such a place. As I arrived, I noticed that the factory was completely run down and abandoned, with boarded up windows and graffiti on the walls. I parked my car outside and made my way towards the entrance, pizza in hand. As I approached the door, I heard strange noises coming from inside, like footsteps echoing through the empty halls. I shrugged it off as my imagination and knocked on the door, calling out to whoever ordered the pizza. To my surprise, the door creaked open on its own, revealing a dark, dusty interior. I hesitated for a moment, but the promise of a large tip pushed me forward. I stepped inside cautiously, calling out once more, but this time there was no response. As I made my way through the factory, I noticed that there was something off about the place. The walls were covered in strange symbols and the air was thick with an ominous feeling. Suddenly, I heard a noise behind me, like something shuffling through the shadows. I turned around, pizza box in hand, and came face to face with a figure cloaked in darkness. It was a tall, shadowy figure with piercing red eyes that seemed to glow in the darkness. I tried to run, but the figure was too fast, grabbing me by the arm and pulling me towards a hidden room in the back of the factory. The room was pitch black, and I could barely make out anything in the darkness. The figure revealed itself to be a cultist, holding a strange, twisted knife in one hand and the pizza in the other. The cultist explained that they had been waiting for me, that the pizza was a lure to bring me to the factory. The cultist told me that they were going to sacrifice me to their dark lord, using the pizza as an offering. I tried to scream, but the cultist held me down, muttering strange chants under their breath. But just as the cultist was about to strike, the police burst into the factory, alerted by a concerned neighbor who saw me go inside. The cultist fled into the shadows, and I was saved from their twisted plans. I never delivered a pizza to a strange location again, always checking the order and address before taking any risks. But the memory of that dark, abandoned factory and the cultist who lured me in will haunt me forever. It was just another ordinary night for me as a pizza delivery driver. I had made several deliveries already, and I was on my way to the next one. The address on my delivery sheet led me to a secluded house at the end of a long, winding road. The road was dark, and the trees seemed to loom overhead, casting eerie shadows all around me. As I approached the house, I noticed that all the lights were off, except for a dim glow coming from a single window on the second floor. I hesitated for a moment, but I was already running late, and I needed the money, so I decided to go ahead with the delivery. I walked up to the front door and knocked loudly, but no one answered. I knocked again, but still no response. Just as I was about to leave, the door creaked open, revealing a figure standing in the darkness. "Hello." I called out, but the figure remained silent. I cautiously stepped inside, clutching the pizza box tightly to my chest. The house was silent, except for the sound of my footsteps echoing through the empty halls. I made my way up to the second floor, following the dim glow of the light. When I reached the room, I knocked on the door, but again, no one answered. I pushed the door open, and to my horror, I saw that the room was completely empty, except for a single rocking chair in the corner, swaying back and forth on its own. Suddenly, I heard a faint whisper coming from behind me. I turned around, but no one was there. The whisper grew louder and more insistent, until it became a deafening roar, filling the entire room. I stumbled backwards, dropping the pizza box in the process. The room began to spin, and I felt like I was falling into a never-ending void. When I finally regained consciousness, I found myself lying on the floor, covered in sweat. I quickly gathered my things and fled the house, vowing never to return. To this day, I still have nightmares about that terrifying experience, and I always double-check the address before delivering any pizzas. It was a Friday night, and I was working the late shift at the local pizza place. We had been receiving a lot of orders, so I was constantly driving around town delivering pizzas. That's when I got an order that would change everything. The order was for a large pepperoni pizza to be delivered to an old, run-down house on the outskirts of town. The delivery was for a Mr. Smith, and the address seemed legit, so I didn't think twice about it. As I drove up to the house, I noticed that all the windows were boarded up, and the front door was slightly ajar. The porch was littered with debris, and the garden was overgrown and unkempt. It gave me an uneasy feeling, but I shrugged it off and rang the doorbell. After a few seconds, I heard shuffling footsteps coming from inside, and the door slowly creaked open. Standing before me was an old man, hunched over and withered, wearing a tattered robe. He motioned for me to come inside, and I hesitated for a moment before stepping in. The inside of the house was dimly lit and smelled musty, like it hadn't been cleaned in years. The old man led me to the living room, where a single candle was flickering on a table. He handed me the money for the pizza, and I handed him the pizza. As I was about to leave, he stopped me, saying he had a special request. He asked if I would stay and have a slice of pizza with him, saying that he had no one to share it with. I was hesitant at first, but he seemed harmless enough, so I agreed. We sat there in silence for a while, eating pizza, when suddenly the old man spoke up. "Do you believe in ghosts?" he asked. I shook my head, trying to remain polite, but he continued. "You know, this house has been in my family for generations. And they say that it's haunted by the ghosts of our ancestors." I started to feel uneasy, wondering where this was going, but the old man kept talking. "They say that every year, on the anniversary of my grandfather's death, his ghost comes back to haunt this house. And tonight is that night." Suddenly, the candle flickered out, plunging the room into darkness. I could hear the old man shuffling around, muttering to himself. Then, I heard something that made my blood run cold, a faint, ghostly whisper, coming from somewhere in the house. I tried to get up and leave, but the old man blocked my way, his eyes wild and frenzied. "You can't leave now," he said. "You have to stay and see the ghost. It's the only way to break the curse." I pushed past him and ran for the door, but it wouldn't budge. It was as if it had been sealed shut from the outside. I turned around and saw the old man coming towards me, his face twisted with anger and fear. That's when I saw it, a figure, floating in the air, draped in tattered clothes, with glowing eyes and a twisted, ghostly face. It was my worst nightmare come to life. I screamed and tried to run, but the ghost blocked my way. It reached out a spectral hand and touched me, and I felt a cold, icy grip on my soul. I thought I was going to die right then and there, but then the ghost vanished into thin air. I never went back to that house again, and I quit my job at the pizza place soon after. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still inside of me. I was working my usual shift at the pizza delivery place, taking orders and making deliveries. It was a pretty slow night, so I was grateful when a new order came in. It was for a large pepperoni pizza, to be delivered to an address on the outskirts of town. I didn't think much of it at the time, so I hopped in my car and drove out to the address. As I pulled up to the house, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The house was old and decrepit, with boarded-up windows and a front yard filled with overgrown weeds. I took a deep breath and walked up to the door, pizza in hand. As I knocked on the door, I heard strange noises coming from inside the house. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but the sounds grew louder and more frantic. Suddenly, the door swung open, and I was face to face with a tall, dark figure. It was dressed in tattered robes and wore a hood that obscured its face. I could feel a chill run down my spine as I handed over the pizza. But as I turned to leave, the figure grabbed me by the arm and pulled me back inside. I tried to break free, but its grip was too strong. The figure led me down a dark hallway, and I could hear strange chanting coming from one of the rooms. The figure finally stopped in front of a door and pushed me inside. The room was filled with candles and strange symbols drawn on the walls. In the center of the room, there was a large pentagram, with a young woman lying in the middle. The figure began to chant in a language I couldn't understand, and I realized that I was in the middle of some kind of demonic ritual. I was terrified and didn't know what to do. But just as the chanting reached a fever pitch, I heard sirens in the distance. The figure panicked and released me, running out of the room and disappearing into the night. The woman was unharmed, but the experience left me scarred for life. I never took another delivery to that address again, and I made sure to always be cautious when taking orders from unfamiliar locations. You never know what kind of horrors could be waiting for you out there in the dark. It was a typical Friday night, and I was delivering pizzas as usual. My last delivery was to a secluded house on the edge of town. As I drove up the long, winding driveway, I noticed that the house looked old and decrepit, with peeling paint and broken windows. I walked up to the front door and rang the doorbell, but no one answered. I knocked on the door, but still no answer. I was about to leave when I heard a faint whisper coming from inside the house. I hesitated for a moment, but then I decided to investigate. I slowly pushed open the door and stepped inside. The house was dark and musty, with cobwebs stretching across every corner. As I walked deeper into the house, I heard strange noises coming from upstairs. I tried to ignore them and focus on delivering the pizza, but the noises grew louder and more intense with each step I took. Finally, I made it to the kitchen, where I found a note on the counter. It read, "Thank you for the pizza. Please help me." I was about to leave the house when I heard a blood-curdling scream coming from upstairs. I rushed up the stairs, pizza in hand, and found myself in a dark hallway. As I made my way down the hallway, I saw that every door was closed, except for one at the end of the hall. I cautiously pushed open the door and found myself in a dimly lit room. At first, I couldn't see anything in the room. But then I saw a figure sitting in the corner, their face obscured by the shadows. As I got closer, I realized that it was a woman, crying and trembling. She told me that she had been held captive in the house for months and that she had managed to send a pizza order as a cry for help. I quickly called the police, and they arrived within minutes to rescue the woman. As I left the house, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, had been watching me the whole time. I drove back to the pizza place, feeling grateful that I had been able to help the woman, but also shaken by the thought of what might have happened if I hadn't taken that last delivery. I used to work as a pizza delivery guy, and let me tell you, I've had some strange encounters on the job. But there's one delivery in particular that still haunts me to this day. It was a dark and stormy night, the kind of night where you'd rather be cozy at home than out on the road. But orders were still coming in, and I needed the money, so I grabbed a large pepperoni pizza and headed out. The delivery address was to an old house on the outskirts of town, surrounded by trees and overgrown bushes. As I pulled up to the house, I noticed that there were no lights on, no signs of life whatsoever. But I shrugged it off, figuring that the customer might just be a late-night worker or insomniac. I grabbed the pizza and walked up to the front door, feeling the wind and rain battering against my jacket. I knocked on the door, and for a moment, nothing happened. But then, the door slowly creaked open, revealing a dark, empty hallway. I hesitated for a moment, but then I called out, "Pizza delivery." No answer. I stepped inside, feeling a chill run down my spine. As I made my way through the hallway, I noticed that there were no pictures on the walls, no furniture, nothing. It was as if the house had been abandoned for years. But then, I heard something coming from the room at the end of the hall. It sounded like whispers, soft and eerie. I walked towards the room, feeling a lump forming in my throat. When I pushed open the door, I saw a group of people sitting in a circle, their faces obscured by dark hoods. They were chanting in a language I didn't recognize, and in the center of the circle, there was a pizza box with a strange symbol on it. I wanted to run, to scream, to do anything to get out of there. But before I could move, one of the hooded figures turned towards me and said, "Welcome, brother. We've been expecting you." I don't remember much after that. All I know is that I woke up hours later, miles away from the house, with no memory of how I got there. To this day, I still wonder what was in that pizza box, and what kind of dark ritual I stumbled upon that night. I was a pizza delivery guy for a small family-owned pizza place in my town. I had been doing this job for a few months and I thought I had seen it all. But one night, I delivered a pizza that still haunts me to this day. It was a Friday night, and the pizza place was extremely busy. I received an order for a pepperoni pizza and I was the only delivery guy available. I grabbed the pizza and quickly drove to the address that was given to me. As I got closer to the location, I realized that it was a rundown apartment complex on the outskirts of town. The building looked abandoned and the windows were boarded up. I hesitated for a moment, but I needed the money, so I decided to go through with it. I parked my car in front of the building and walked up the stairs to the apartment number that was listed on the order. I knocked on the door and waited, but there was no answer. I knocked again, but still no answer. I decided to call the number that was listed on the order, and to my surprise, someone answered. It was a deep, raspy voice that asked me to leave the pizza at the door and walk away. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I left the pizza and started walking back to my car. As I was walking, I heard a faint noise coming from the apartment. It sounded like someone was whispering, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. I stopped in my tracks, and as I turned around, I saw the door of the apartment slowly opening. I froze, watching in horror as a pale, thin figure emerged from the apartment. The figure had long, stringy hair and sunken eyes that looked like they hadn't slept in days. It was dressed in a tattered robe that barely covered its skeletal frame. The figure took a few steps towards me, and I could see that its skin was gray and mottled. I felt my heart racing as I tried to back away, but my feet felt like they were glued to the ground. The figure stopped in front of me and stared at me with its lifeless eyes. It opened its mouth and whispered in a low, guttural voice, "Thanks for the pizza." I finally managed to break free from the trance and ran as fast as I could back to my car. I drove away from the apartment complex as fast as I could, feeling like I was being watched the entire time. I never forgot that experience, and I never went back to that part of town again. It was a delivery that I will never forget, and I still wonder to this day who or what that figure was and what it wanted with that pizza. It was a dark and stormy night, and I was working my shift as a pizza delivery driver. I got a call for a delivery to an old, run-down house on the outskirts of town. I hesitated for a moment, but I needed the money, so I decided to take the order. As I drove up to the house, I could feel a chill run down my spine. The house was old and decrepit, with peeling paint and broken windows. I got out of the car and made my way to the front door, feeling a sense of dread building in my chest. When I knocked on the door, it swung open with a creak, revealing a dark, empty interior. I called out to whoever ordered the pizza, but there was no answer. I cautiously stepped inside, pizza box in hand, and made my way through the dark, musty house. As I turned a corner, I saw a figure standing at the end of the hallway. It was a woman, with long, tangled hair and a tattered dress. She stared at me with dark, empty eyes, and I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. I tried to run back the way I came, but the woman started to move towards me, her limbs contorting in unnatural ways. I stumbled and fell, dropping the pizza box in the process. As I scrambled to pick it up, I heard a low, guttural growl coming from behind me. I turned around to see a horde of grotesque creatures, with sharp claws and gnashing teeth, advancing towards me. I knew I was in trouble, so I turned and ran as fast as I could, with the creatures hot on my heels. As I burst through the front door, I could feel their claws scratching at my back, but I managed to make it to my car and drive away. To this day, I have no idea what I encountered in that old house, but I know that I never want to go back there again. It was a Friday night, and I was delivering pizzas to make some extra cash. I had been working for the same pizza place for a few years, and I was used to delivering to all sorts of customers. But this delivery was different. The address was on the outskirts of town, in an area I wasn't familiar with. The house was old and run down, with peeling paint and broken windows. As I pulled up to the house, I had a feeling that something wasn't right. I grabbed the pizza and made my way up the front steps. As I knocked on the door, I heard a strange noise coming from inside. It sounded like whispers, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. The door slowly creaked open, and I stepped inside. The room was dark and musty, and I couldn't see much. I called out to the customer, but there was no answer. Suddenly, I heard a soft shuffling sound coming from the corner of the room. I turned my flashlight towards the noise, and my heart stopped. There was a person, or something, standing in the shadows. I couldn't make out any features, but I could feel its eyes on me. I tried to back away, but I stumbled and fell, dropping the pizza. The thing in the corner started moving towards me, its footsteps slow and deliberate. I scrambled to my feet and ran for the door. As I reached for the handle, I felt a cold, bony hand grab my shoulder. I screamed and pulled away, but the thing was too strong. I managed to break free and ran out of the house as fast as I could. I jumped into my car and peeled out of the driveway, never looking back. When I got back to the pizza place, I told my boss what had happened. He looked at me skeptically, but I could tell he was a little spooked. From that day on, I made sure to never deliver to that house again. I still get chills thinking about what was in that room, and I wonder if it's still there, waiting for its next victim.